Okay, we are continuing with the book of Hosea. We're going into chapter 10 this time. I had planned to cover the entire chapter, but as I got into verse 12, I decided that that was a study all on its own. And trying to fit it in with all the rest of the chapter just was not going to cut it. It would be, well, you'd miss a couple of days' work because I'd be going so long. Anyway, we are just going up to verse 11 in this study. We'll pick up verse 12 in our next study. It's a quote that I'm sure you've heard, and so you'll enjoy that as we get into it. Today, we're going to call this God's debit card. And unfortunately, I am going to have to read a lot of my text this time because I just did not have time to get it all into my PowerPoint. So anyway, let's start by reviewing just a little bit of what we've covered previously. We've covered up through chapter 9, and that is chapter 9 of Hosea. We saw that chapter 1 was I'm not sure whether you believe it or not, but chapter 1 is a summary. It's a picture summary. And it's a picture of the godly prophet who had an unfaithful wife. The names of the husband and wife, husband, of course, being Hosea, husband, wife, and all the kids, tell the story that God has to tell about our redemption. And a mighty story that is. It's really a picture of God and Israel, but it's given to us as an example for the church. Chapters 2 and 3 continue with the redemption story, and chapters 4 through 9 are a description and tell the consequences of not following God. As a review, God wanted to heal Israel. God's real desire was to heal Israel, but there was wickedness found in the leadership. Now, when I say Israel, I'm talking about the 10 northern tribes. There used to be 10 northern tribes. The 10 northern tribes, but there was found wickedness in the leadership. And chapter 9 that we studied in our last study gave us some historical reminders of some of the situations with Israel, partly with the united Israel and continuing with the history of the broken nation. America, America, hear this story. It can happen to us. Israel didn't think they were ever going to lose. America doesn't think we're ever going to lose. But unfortunately, that is very possible. Chapter 10 that we're going to get in today starts with pictures of Israel's sin. Again, it's an example for the church and for us. We're going to be looking at God's debit card. Wouldn't you like to have God's debit card? Well, we'll talk about that. You do. We're going to talk about a divided heart, and then we're going to talk about the prophecy. So let's jump in at verse 1. Israel is an empty vine. He bringeth forth fruit unto himself according to the multitude of his fruit. He hath increased the altars. According to the goodness of his land, they have made goodly images. God said he didn't want any images. Well, let me preface what we're going to be saying about this by saying that the obvious, and that is that I don't get any compensation for this. So what I'm going to say here has nothing to do with asking anybody for any money. Um, anyway, let's repeat the verse and continue on from there. Israel is an empty vine. He bringeth forth fruit unto himself according to the multitude of his fruit. He hath increased the altars. According to the goodness of his land, they have made goodly images. Now, it said there that Israel was an empty vine. That didn't mean that they didn't have fruit. That didn't mean that they weren't being blessed. It meant just the opposite. They were being blessed, but let's go back to the verse. Israel is an empty vine. He bringeth forth fruit unto himself. Let's go back to where we were. He bringeth forth fruit unto himself. This is an example for us. Listen, listen, listen. You know, jobs bring money. Most of us that want a job can have a job, and that job brings money. What do you do with that money? Who decides what you do with that money? That money is ours. Oh, we may give God a little tip, 10%. We give the waitress 15. Give God 10%. We think, I earned that. That was the thinking of Israel. That was the thinking as they reaped the fruit. Part of verse 10 again. According to the multitude of his fruit, he hath increased the altars. According to the goodness of his land, they have made goodly images. Let me tell you what they were doing, and then we're going to examine what we're doing. What they were doing was they were taking the fruit that God was giving them. God was blessing them. He was giving them produce that just didn't quit. And they were taking it and they were building altars to other gods. Is that the thing we should do with God's money, with God's resources? God's the one that caused them to have that fruit. They didn't just, it wasn't something of theirs. We think we earn our money. Oh, man. Who gives us the capability to earn that money? Who gives the opportunity for any of that? Now, let me just tell you a little bit more here. Some spiritual Christians think when they've given their 10% that then the rest of it is theirs. Whatever it is they have is theirs. To do with whatever they want to. Buy a bigger computer, a faster computer, a better phone, a prettier car, a faster car, a boat, a motorcycle, an RV. Well, let me tell you, there's nothing wrong with those things except God gives us that resource to use for his benefit. We're going to read a parable fairly soon here, and I want you to think about that as we read that parable. Now, occasionally, very often as a matter of fact, I'll give one of my grandkids or one of my kids either a credit card or my debit card to go and buy something. Sometimes it's food for us. Sometimes it's something that we need to make a repair in the house. but it's for my benefit when I give them that card. When God gives us resource, when God gives us his debit card, we're to use 100% of it as he directs. Now, part of that is that we want to pay our bills on time, and those bills better be something that bring honor to him. But we need to pay those bills on time so that he's not embarrassed by the credit collectors coming to our door to get our money or his money. We also need to be considering every penny that we spend and how we can best bring honor and glory to him. Let me tell you, I use the internet, and I use it, and most of you know it, to share things like this video. I pay for that internet. That comes out of God's debit card. Oh, I believe in giving money to the church. Absolutely. To the local church, should be contributing to the local church, to their operation. But there's much more than that. Much more than just giving to the church. 100% of the resources that God gives you and that God gives me are to be used for his glory. Now, I can't say that I always do that. I'm not trying to put a shame on you. But that's what it should be. Israel was using the resources that God gave them to increase the number of altars that they were putting up on the hills so that they could worship other gods. They were using it to make better images. Oh, that's bad. That's a bad way to use God's credit card. Sometimes I think we don't even think about the things that we buy as to what honor they're going to bring to the Lord. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't buy things, but I am saying that we need to consider when we buy something that it brings honor and glory to the Lord. Now, I bought this shirt a few weeks ago. I think it's a nice looking shirt, but I bought it so that I wouldn't look like a slob when you look at me on these pictures because my collars were all fraying. Now that's bringing honor to the Lord. Excuse me. There we go. All right. Divided heart. says their heart is divided. Now they shall be found faulty. He shall break down their altars. He shall spoil their images. Now, God said that Israel's heart is divided. Folks, when you use God's debit card wrongly, your heart is divided. When I do it, I make excuses. No, that's called a divided heart. Israel claimed to be worshiping the Lord. They had a temple set up that was supposedly to worship the Lord. But they had calves in there, golden calves. They were worshiping those golden calves. They used the resources of God to embarrass him. Oh, folks, that's no way to do. Find computers. Computers are a great tool. But just to get it, just so that you can be better for yourself, better games, better whatever, it needs to be better something for the Lord, whatever you're doing. Churches spend money. Now, I've got no problem with churches spending money. Church usually has a budget, and they spend within the budget, and they do good things. There's nothing wrong with having the church look nice. That brings honor to the Lord. The Lord doesn't want us to go into a place that looks like a pig slop. Going on, divided heart. For now they shall say, we have no king, because we feared not the Lord. What then should a king do to us? Now, this is talking about the judgment. This is actually speaking of the king being dethroned. He wasn't dethroned yet, not in this part of Hosea, but he will be. And so it's all because they didn't fear the Lord. Verse 4. They have spoken words, swearing falsely and making a covenant. Thus judgment springeth up as hemlock in the furrows of the field. It says that they've made a covenant. They made a covenant with Assyria. They were actually paying tribute to Assyria. And we're going to see here in a minute that not only were they paying tribute, but part of that tribute was that king required that they give him the golden calf out of the temple there. Oh, what a good deal. But anyway, this was before the Assyrians overran Israel, but it's coming, and that's what they're saying. They were swearing falsely. They made a covenant that they thought they could keep. They quit paying their tribute, and guess what? They happened. It says here that this judgment will spring up like hemlock in the furrows of the field. Now, I've been reading about furrows in the field and how crops are planted and so forth. I'm not a farmer. And in some crops, they want on the crown of the where they dig furrows in the trough, and some places they'll use that for watering the field. Some types of crops like to grow in the furrow itself. Others like to grow on the top of the mound there. So the vines, it says, like to live in the furrow. Well, it says here that this is going to spring up like hemlock. Hemlock is a poisonous plant. And it's going to be in the furrow of the field where their vines grow. Oh, my. Hemlock growing where the food that they want to eat is? That's a terrible thing. Folks, this is an example for us. It's an example for the church. I want you to think about this. Think about the idols in the church. Some churches have one type of idol, some have another, but most churches have some idols in it. The ones that I've been in recently, the idols that I get concerned about are things like yoga and Freemasonry, and other types of things that are Hindu worship, like spiritual formation. That's Hindu worship, and it's openly done in churches. Grows up like hemlock. It's poison in the church. just straight poison in the church. Divided heart. Hosea 10, verses 5 and 6. The inhabitants of Samaria, that's the capital city, the inhabitants of Samaria shall fear because the calves of Bethaven. Now I want to stop here a minute. I looked for Bethaven on the maps. The only place I could find Bethaven on the maps was at Bethel. You go back to the book of Joshua, and it tells us that Bethaven is on the side of Ai at Bethel. Now, Bethel means house of God. Bethaven, oh, that's the house of idols, the house of, well, we know what was going on at Bethel. That's where they had the idol for the calf, or the idol of the calf, and other idols. It says, the inhabitants of Samaria shall fear because the calves of Bethaven, for the people thereof shall mourn over it. Now, wait a minute. Let me stop here just a second. They're going to mourn, and we're going to see as we get deeper into this, and we won't get there today because I shut the thing off, but we're going to see that they had to give the king of Assyria the golden calf. Of course he wanted the golden calf. Any king won't sell that much gold. I don't know whether he cut it up and melted the gold down and whatever he did with the gold, but they're going to mourn over losing this calf in the temple that's supposed to be worshiping Jehovah. Oh, man. For the people thereof shall mourn over it. They're going to mourn over the loss of that calf. And the priests thereof that rejoiced on it for the glory thereof, because it is departed from it. It shall be also carried to Assyria for a present. I forgot. Here's where it tells us that it's given as a present to King Jareb. He's the king of Assyria. It's given as a present to him. Ephraim shall receive shame, and Israel shall be ashamed of his own counsel. Folks, we keep saying that we're worshiping the Lord, but sometimes there are idols in our churches. Sometimes there are idols in our homes. Sometimes we've got a divided heart. Our heart is set more on our computer, our cars, our phones. Oh, let me tell you, I was greeting some people in church one day, and I went to greet one young man, and he had his phone. He was looking at it. He was playing some game on it. And I was distracting him. I was disturbing him. In church! I mean, the sermon hadn't started, but still, he was in church. I saw another guy playing a game during the sermon. Oh, man. These idols were carried off into Assyria. Not all the idols on the hill, but the golden calf. Now we get to the prophecy. As for Assyria, her king is cut off as foam upon the water. Now, stopping there for just a minute. This had not happened yet, or this had not happened yet. It has happened now, but it had not happened yet at the time this was written. As for Samaria, her king is cut off. as the foam upon water. You've seen water with a little wave in it, wave from a boat particularly, comes in, and that little wave breaks as it comes um, to the shore and so forth. And there's all kind of foam there as it's breaking, but as it goes back out, that foam is gone. The high places also of Avon. Now, I think that's again. This is the uh, the thing of idolatry. Uh, the high places also of Avon, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed. The thorns and thistles shall come up on their altars, and they shall say to the mountains, Cover us, and to the hills, Fall on us. Now, this is written about the kings of Samaria. They were still in tenuous power. They were paying tribute to Assyria, but not for long. They were breaking down. The high places of Avon, high places of idolatry, those are going to be destroyed. Thorns and thistles will grow up around them. Now, of course, that takes us back to the time of Adam and Eve, where God announced the result of their sin. That is the results of his judgment on their sin. That is that they would have thorns and thistles growing up in the gardens. And I remember a place that I worked. I've told the story, I'm sure, several times here, but a place that I worked that was a beautiful place, big campus, and they closed it down. Nobody left there. I drove back by there some months or years later, and the area was all grown up with all kinds of weeds. It looked a mess. And I knew that place was a beautiful place because I'd worked there for several years. But that's what the Lord says is going to happen to Israel. That's the prophecy. And indeed, that has happened. Going on into the last part of verse 8 again. This is a part that you probably recognized as we went through it. They shall say to the mountains, Cover us, and to the hills, Fall on us. We see those exact words stated in Luke 23:30 and in Revelation 6:16. Guess what that time is? That is the time of the future tribulation. It's still future to us. It hasn't happened yet. But Israel's going to be back during that time. All of Israel will be back during that time. But that's the tribulation in the future. That's during the seal judgments. If you're reading the book of Revelation, things are going to be bad. Remember, the first seal, when the first seal is opened, a fourth of the population of the earth die. A fourth of the population of the earth die. And then further on down, a third of what is left, which means it's another fourth. So half of the world's population dies very early in that 7-year tribulation period. It's not going to be a fun time. But God's going to be bringing Israel back together. They're going to be in the forefront of God's plan. Don't you write Israel off. They are important to God's plan. I had a young Israeli ask me about people oppressing the people of Israel, people of Judah. And I had to tell him, that's not just people. Folks, if the devil could cause Israel to not exist, If the devil could kill every Jew in the world, God couldn't carry out his plan. But God's guarding them. God's taking care of them. They're going to be all right. All right. Going on. Excuse me, it didn't go. Verse 9. Still dealing with the prophecy. O Israel, thou hast sinned from the days of Gibeah. Now, we talked about Gibeah in our last study. So I'm not going to cover that in detail, but let me just remind you, that is a place in the tribe of Benjamin where a Levite went, spent the night, and I'm going to call her his wife. She's a little shaky there, but his wife was given to the men of the city, and they raped her all night long, and she was dead the next morning. This Levite cut her body up and sent it around to all of the tribes of Israel, and they declared war on the tribe of Benjamin because Benjamin didn't take care of that. Now, it starts out telling that these men of Benjamin were homosexuals. They wanted the Levite. They didn't want his wife. They wanted the Levite himself. But they only got his wife. Anyway, the verse goes on. Well, it will start again. O Israel, thou hast sinned from the days of Gibeah. There they stood. The battle in Gibeah against the children of iniquity did not overtake them. They left 600 men in Benjamin, to rebuild that tribe. It is my desire, that's God says, it is my desire that I should chastise them, chastise Israel, and the people shall be gathered against them when they shall bind themselves in their two furrows. Now, this is a difficult verse to understand. I read many commentaries on this. I listened to preachers interpret this. None of them agreed. Anyway, I'm going to give you my interpretation. It's different from all the rest of them. I never heard any of them come up with it, so it's probably wrong. But anyway, let's begin by tackling the word furrows, that last word there. The older translations, there were translations into English before we had our King James. There was the Geneva Bible for one. There was the Bishop's Bible, for another. Both of those translate this word furrows just like the King James does. But some of in fact, all of the newer translations translate it in numbers of ways. They translate it into things like sin, iniquity, various things having to do with transgressions of various sorts, which is probably an okay understanding of that. But the word furrows here is a word that is normally translated eyes. These things right here. So this is talking about having two eyes. What does it mean? People shall be gathered together against them. Anyway, with verse 8, I I decided that the context was something that I needed to rest heavily on to discern what this is talking about. Now, in verse 8, where we wound up, let me just back up there to verse 8. We saw that, or we talked about this, that this is during the tribulation time. They cover us, or calling for the mountains to cover us and for the hills and so forth to fall on us. Anyway, I believe this is a continuation of that statement there, and a continuation of dealing with it during the tribulation time. And with that, God wanted to chastise. That's exactly what he's going to do during the tribulation time. And it says that they shall bind themselves in their two furrows. Now, I believe that this is talking about Israel and Judah coming back together during the tribulation time. You can take that and like it or not like it, but I also look there at the word bind. The word bind is a word that is most often translated yoke. Now, if you put a yoke on an oxen, particularly if you put a yoke on two oxen, you bind them together so that they work together. Well, this is saying they shall yoke themselves in their two eyes. Going on into verse 11 here, says, and Ephraim is an heifer that is taught and loved to tread out the corn, but I passed over upon her fair neck. I will make Ephraim to ride, Judah shall plow, and Jacob shall break his clods. Now, this particular verse is again one that's a little hard to understand, and I found that I needed to really deal with this in the Hebrew to understand it. And I don't know that I understand it, but I translated the verse like this. Now, I never recommend my translations. I can translate, but I'm not a scholar. And so here we've got a Hubbard's translation, unapproved by anybody. And Israel is a heifer to be taught. I love to tread, and I passed over her good neck. I will ride Ephraim. Judah will plow. Jacob will fallow for him. Now, again, I believe this is talking about bringing the tribes of Israel and the tribes of Judah back together, yoking them, and the Lord saying he's going to ride Ephraim and Judah's going to plow. In other words, they're going to be yoked together, and the Lord's going to be sitting on Ephraim and tied to Judah. And as Jacob, they're going to break up the clods there in the field. They're going to make it a plowed field. Now, I believe this is talking about the 144,000 that we have in the book of Revelation. I don't have good um, references to deal with that. So again, take it and understand it yourself. Uh, please study that. And again, I wish I felt that I'd had time to include the next verse in this, because the next verse really starts to get into some things there, and it gets very personal. But we covered some difficult verses. We covered some verses that were hard to swallow. We talked about God's debit card. Now, I started to call it his credit card, but he doesn't need credit. He owns it all. So it's his debit card. He gives us his debit card every time he gives us anything. He gives us that debit card. It all belongs to him. We don't own anything. We're to use whatever resources he gives to his glory. We're to treat the resources that he gives with great respect. Now, I want to read a parable here. I could have read it during the main part of the study, but I decided to read it here in the conclusion. This is from Matthew chapter 25, verses 13 through 30. It was too long for me to create a PowerPoint thing on that, so you'll have to look at that in your own Bible. Matthew 25, 13 through 30. It says, "For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods." Verse 15. "And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to every man according to his several ability. And straightway took his journey." Verse 16. "Then he that had received 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them another 5 talents. And likewise he that had 2 also gained other 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth, and hid the Lord's money. After a long time the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoneth with them. And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents. That's what we're talking about, is the way you use God's debit card. You gain more. Brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained besides them 5 talents more. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. He also that had received 2 talents came to his Lord. Thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents besides them. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Then he which had received 1 talent came and said, Lord, I know that thou art an hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, thou hast thine that is thine. His Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him that hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The point here is that the Lord handed each of these servants. This is a picture for us. The Lord handed to each of his servants things that he felt they could handle. He doesn't give us what we can't handle. Even the one with 1 talent could have put it in the bank in a savings account. Now, savings account wouldn't have done him much good in America these days, but normally you could have put it in a savings account and gained interest. He could have found something to invest it in and gained interest, but he didn't do that. And the Lord said to cast him into outer darkness. Then we looked at the divided heart. The divided heart, it's easy to see what somebody else does. Particularly, it's easy to see here in Israel that their heart was divided. They had a golden calf in the temple that they were supposed to be. It was supposed to be the main worship of God. They claimed to worship God. The king didn't want them to go down to Jerusalem, where the real temple was. But think about us and cell phones, computers, sex. Listen, none of those things are wrong in the right place. Those things are good in the right place if they're bringing gain for the Lord. Church, yoga, various Hindu worship, churches with idols in them, burning candles to saints. Oh man, divided heart. Then we saw prophecy. Some tough verses in the prophecy section, but I believe they're talking about the uniting of Israel, the bringing them back together. Now, I didn't find anybody that said that, so don't take that as being what it's really all about. You study it for yourself. I believe that every one of us should study the Word of God himself. But you know, the Lord has given us a great gift. And boy, we're going to see that in our next study. In John 1:12, it says, "But as many as received him, as many as received Jesus, as many as received him, to them gave he power to become sons of God." Folks, have you asked Jesus to come into your heart, to be the Lord of your life, to help you know how to use God's debit card, to keep your heart together, not divided, together, and follow the prophecy? Oh, we've got some good prophecy coming for us. We didn't cover that in this study. We'll start to look at some in our next one. But as many as received him, as many as received Jesus, to them gave he power to become sons of God. What a gift. Even to them that believe on his name. Believe on his name. John 3:16, most popular memory verse. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him, whosoever believeth in him. Do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in his resurrection? How do we use God's debit card? How do you use God's debit card? I'm not sure I want to tell you all the things that I use God's debit card for. Some of it may not be right. I need to do something about that. Is your heart confused about what God to worship? Empower to become a child of God. Romans chapter 10 verse 9 says that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. Are you saved? Are you using God's debit card correctly? Are you sure you're worshiping the real God and not sticking a golden calf in front of, between you and God? Power to become a child of God is in your hands. He's given it to you. If you confess him as Lord and believe in your heart that God has raised Jesus from the dead, you'll be saved. Do that today. Thank you for joining me here.